Russia shut 7 railway border crossings with Finland, Estonia, and Latvia on July 1st, with no explanation, no end date, and millions of men already trapped inside by a digital system they never saw coming. The question driving everything right now is this: has Putin quietly built a cage around his own population, and what happens when that cage gets tighter? On July 1st, 2026, the Russian government suspended traffic through a number of railway checkpoints on the borders with Finland, Estonia, and Latvia. Officials did not disclose any reasons for the closures or say when the checkpoints might reopen. 7 key checkpoints across these European frontiers were shut in a single stroke. 5 of the closures fell on the Russian-Finnish border alone, including Vyborg, Vyacheslav, Liutia, St. Petersburg-Finliansky, and Svetogorsk. The closures left Finland with no open railway crossings with Russia whatsoever. The Kremlin's order, released on the day before, provided no reason for the closures, mentioning only a temporary suspension of the movement of people, vehicles, goods, and cargo through selected railway crossings. No timeline, no justification. That silence is the message. So, what does this actually mean for the millions of military-age men still living inside Russia? That answer requires going back several years to understand the machinery that's been quietly assembling around them. Everything changed on September 21, 2022, when Putin's televised announcement of partial mobilization was not just a military measure. It was the moment the Kremlin admitted that the regular army had been exhausted in Ukraine and that the state now intended to wage war with the bodies of ordinary civilian men. Russia's partial mobilization in 2022, the first since World War II, triggered nationwide protests and the exodus of more than 261,000 men. According to the Moscow Times, the unpopular September 2022 mobilization prompted up to 1 million Russians to flee the country. The Kremlin watched that flood of people pour across the borders into Georgia, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia, and it drew a very clear lesson: never let it happen again. The creation of a centralized digital registry was ordered by Putin after his September 2022 mobilization decree. In April 2023, he signed a law making electronic summonses legally equivalent to paper ones, formally tying them to a range of travel and civil restrictions. The April 2023 electronic summons laws removed the need to physically hand a draft notice to a man. The state could now call him up while he slept and impose immediate punitive restrictions, a travel ban, frozen bank accounts. Think about what that means in practice. A man wakes up on a Tuesday morning, checks his phone, and he's already legally barred from leaving Russia. He didn't sign anything. He didn't show up anywhere. The system flagged him and closed the door behind him without him ever knowing it had moved. Electronic draft notices sent via a government portal automatically flag recipients in all border databases, barring them from leaving the country. The latest rollout enforces those measures in full, effectively closing Russia's borders to tens of thousands of draft-eligible men. And the system only keeps expanding. In late August 2025, the government further extended the validity of draft notices to 1 year, effectively allowing men to be called up across 2 consecutive draft cycles. Officials claimed the move was meant to ensure more efficient planning of mobilization. A presidential decree signed in late December 2025 calls up 261,000 men aged 18 to 30 who are not in the reserve. Conscripts are barred from leaving Russia for 30 days following the issuance of a summons. 30 days per notice, renewed across 2 consecutive draft cycles, with the digital system running continuously. The math is straightforward. For a growing number of men, the exit window is permanently closed. This is precisely why analysts at the Front's Geopolitical platform identified the situation as potentially unsustainable. Russian volunteer recruitment has collapsed despite record bonuses, with first quarter 2026 enlistment falling 19,000 below the prior year's level and missing targets needed for planned military expansion. The soldiers Moscow does have are reaching their limits. Many Russian soldiers unwilling to fight in Ukraine are deserting and then turning themselves in, seeking prosecution and imprisonment to avoid being sent back to the front. As the independent Russian outlet Media Zona reports, Some are even hiring lawyers to persuade investigators to open criminal cases against them, though that doesn't always work. Read that again. Men in active military units are paying lawyers, not to get them out of criminal charges, but to get them into criminal charges. Prison has become the only legal way out of the front line. Putin's mobilization decree remains in effect, making all military contracts open-ended. Soldiers can leave the front only by turning 65, receiving a medical discharge, or being sentenced to prison by a court. For most, the third is the only realistic option. So here's the updated shape of what's happening as of the summer of 2026. At the top, a state that desperately needs more bodies and can't get them through voluntary means. At the bottom, men inside Russia who refuse to volunteer and are now running out of physical routes to leave. And in between, a digital iron seal that tightens every time the system issues another notice. The question we should be asking now is sharper than it was a year ago. Does the July 1st railway closure signal that a new full mobilization wave is coming? And if it does, can Putin actually contain the backlash this time? Subscribe now, because in the next segment we're going to look at the specific enforcement mechanism and how badly it's already straining. Because the numbers of deserters tell a story Moscow does not want told. The independent publication Mediazona claimed that almost 21,000 Russian servicemen were convicted for refusing to serve. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights said in September that at least 50,000 Russian soldiers, or about 1 in 10 servicemen fighting in Ukraine, had deserted since 2022. 1 in 10. That's not a discipline problem, that's a structural collapse of consent. Despite monthly mobilization of 40,000 to 43,000 people, Russia is already losing up to 45,000 troops a month due to desertions, injuries, and the effectiveness of Ukrainian drone technology. In January 2026 alone, Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky said Russian army losses killed and severely wounded exceeded 31,700 personnel, surpassing the rate at which its forces are being replenished. The numbers don't balance, they can't, and the Kremlin knows it. The number of men choosing to fight in Ukraine has fallen by a third this spring compared with this time last year. Gaps in Russia's military are now largely being filled by detainees, with police offering the chance to fight in Ukraine to suspects rather than face jail. The system has been so hollowed out that the Kremlin is essentially reversing the logic of punishment. Fight or face charges. Fight or stay locked up. By 2024 and 2025, Russia had shifted to what independent monitors call crypto-mobilization, or continuous hidden mobilization. No new televised decree from Putin, no fixed end date, just a quiet, relentless flow of electronic summonses, raids on workplaces and apartment blocks, and recruitment of prisoners and migrants. That's the architecture of the Iron Seal. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't hold a press conference. It just quietly closes exits, one by one, while the official story stays the same. There is no mobilization. Everything is fine. Russian opposition journalist Michael Nucky stated that if a new mobilization is announced, the Russian government will have to close the borders and massively suppress the dissatisfied. Should Russia initiate a mobilization, it will likely not be possible for those who do not want to fight to leave the country, as it was nearly 4 years ago during the 2022 partial mobilization. The border closures announced for July 1st map directly onto that forecast. Now consider the geography of what was just sealed. The closures cut one of the few remaining direct land transport links between Russia and its European Union neighbors along this stretch of the frontier. Finland had already shut its vehicle and pedestrian crossings with Russia in December 2023. Helsinki claimed that influx of asylum seekers was a so-called hybrid attack by the Kremlin, in retribution for Finland joining North Atlantic Treaty Organization in April 2023. So the pattern is clear. One exit closes, then another, then another. The Kremlin doesn't announce a wall, it just keeps quietly adding bricks. The non-governmental organization Idite Lesom, meaning Get Lost, founded by Grigory Sverdlin, has helped more than 53,000 individuals avoid military service and facilitated the desertion of more than 1,460 soldiers. That organization is now operating in a world where the legal avenues it once exploited are vanishing month by month. The digital registry flags men before they reach the border. The border guards, now operating under expanded Federal Security Service protocols, stop them when they try. Under current protocol, Federal Security Service border guards must escort these individuals to a designated area where a supervisor delivers a formal explanation and written notice, warning that failure to report for service could result in criminal prosecution. Men stopped at the border don't go home, they go into the system. 60% of deserters remain in Russia, living off the grid. They're not in Georgia or Kazakhstan or Germany, they're hiding inside the country, which tells you something critical. The seal isn't just keeping men from leaving, it's also pushing the internal resistance underground, where the state can hunt it at its convenience. There's a fair counter-argument to all of this. Russia has shown a remarkable ability to sustain losses that would have broken other armies. Ukrainian intelligence claims that about 70,500 new Russian soldiers signed contracts in the first 3 months of 2026, falling short of the Russian Defense Ministry's goal by about 30,000. According to media reports, mass mobilization drills were held in Russia's Volgograd region in mid-June, with officials from neighboring regional administrations invited to attend. The drilling of administrative officials is not routine. That's logistics preparation. You invite regional administrators to mobilization drills when you're planning for mobilization at a regional scale. Russia's unsustainable manpower, economic, and logistical crises are likely to force Putin into a new wave of military mobilization in 2026, despite his long-standing avoidance of the move. The front's analysis from June 2026 laid it out plainly. The mathematics of attrition are not on Moscow's side, and the voluntary path has hit its ceiling. Yet the political risk is just as real. According to data obtained by the Moscow Times, the September 2022 mobilization was extremely unpopular and prompted up to 1 million Russians to flee the country. Putin has since avoided another large-scale draft. He avoided it precisely because he watched 1 million people walk out the door. The Iron Seal exists because that door can never be left open again. And now, from the outside, the doors are closing too. Over just the first 9 months of 2025, Finland deported 104 Russians who had applied for political asylum, including deserters. Estonia formally banned entry to those who fought in Ukraine for the Russian military, with that ban extended to deserters as well. The men who do make it out are finding fewer places willing to take them. The Russian state is now designing new ways to reach across borders and harm them. In late July 2026, Amnesty International flagged a draft Russian law imposing sweeping restrictions on government critics abroad, calling it an attempt to weaponize punishment and silence dissent beyond Russian borders. The cage is no longer just a domestic structure. Moscow is trying to extend its walls into exile. What we're watching in real time is the compression of every exit. The digital registry seals the border before a man reaches it. The Federal Security Service stops him if the registry missed him. The July railway closures remove physical rail routes that were among the last low-visibility options for crossing into Europe. And now, even in Europe, host governments are tightening asylum rules and deporting those who made it. The 2022 partial mobilization remains the operative wartime framework, still formally in effect with no termination decree issued. That single legal fact is the foundation of the entire structure. Putin never ended the mobilization, he just stopped talking about it. And in that legal silence, the machinery keeps running. The Iron Seal isn't one decision, it's 1,000 quiet decisions accumulating into something that now looks, from the inside, like an inescapable perimeter. What's unresolved is what happens when the pressure inside that perimeter reaches the point where no single carrot and stick policy can hold it. The Kremlin has bought time by avoiding a second formal mobilization decree, but the recruiting shortfalls, the desertion rates, and the July border moves all point in the same direction. Does Putin eventually announce a second full mobilization? And if he does, what does a population with no exit do next? And as Russia tightens its grip on its own people from the inside, while trying to extend its reach over exiles on the outside, is there any line left that Moscow won't cross to keep the war fed? What do you think? Tell me in the comments.